what I just said. It's interesting to sit here and talk about that, seemingly rationally and logically, in terms of the logic of possibility, not the logic of linearity, but the actual fact of sitting here in this park right now makes certain things possible. The experience of the wind blowing, the experience of watching all the fluff come from the trees, and the bugs and the spiders crawling on me, and the ants and butterflies, has nothing to do with linear time. And then the fact of being somewhere else, sitting there, different possibilities. Or if I were at home, different possibilities, different epigenetic matrix. So talking about the possibility of moving somewhere else, some other physical location, and how moving to a place of higher vibration resonates more with higher vibration and likely would cause less troubles for this individual being, supposed individual being. And that would change the dynamic of that which one left behind. Now, I remember being in a state where one wasn't talking about that rationally, but one was feeling it and sensing it. One was in that quantum state of seeing possibility as a felt sense, as in overlapping realities present now. Right now, I feel like I'm in this reality, but there's times where I've felt like I'm in multiple ones, and each step I take, I see the change in possibility, and I see the future. Like, I would literally feel like, wow, if I go this way, that person over there is going to get Alzheimer's. And I don't know in how long, because it's a timeless space. So it's hard to know when, and that's the part that's scary. One sees the possibility, but one doesn't know when. That's the surprise. Or one sees one's own demise, each way one turns. And then the mental health system is often seen as surrendering to one's own longevity with the conditioned circumstances one is in now, and getting stuck in that, because then it's hard to leave once one has a diagnosis. So it could be the longest material existence one can have, being in that system. Otherwise, one goes into the light, and then one turns another way, and one sees that that direction excludes another being from one's future. And so one surrenders to the longevity of all others, and takes all these chemicals and stuff, and then reduces the longevity of one's own physical existence by doing that, to stay put and feed the longevity of others. I don't know. I have no idea. But it's one thing to be here sitting here talking like that, or talking about it, and it's another to be in that state where one can see it everywhere one looks. And it's possible that when one gets to a place, an environment that is suitable, then the brain never goes into a space of seeing possibilities, as one has planted the seed in the best possible place, in a way, for the possible future. I don't know if that makes sense. And then one no longer has to go into a state of seeing all these possibilities and having the brain overwhelmed, which often leads to having to take medication to medicate the possibilities away. When one goes to live a good possibility, then the brain doesn't have to go into that state of trying to find other possibilities. And since it's unable to change so quickly, we do change quickly, but we change quickly back, because others don't like us changing so quickly. I don't know. I don't know about this whole thing about individual and others and blah blah. I think it has something to do with right now. I feel like I have free will, and so others do too. That's what people like. And I'm hoping to get to a field where there's no free will, but there is freedom. And I feel like I'm in that sort of space where I'm protecting that possibility. And protecting this one from the free will of others that would impose their will upon this energy field. You know, there really is a reason why there's a saying, I wouldn't hurt a fly. Because flies are considered to be one of the most disgusting creatures. I remember when I went into a peak state of consciousness and had a little dialogue with a bunch of flies 7 years ago. I said to myself, I wouldn't hurt a fly. And I'm laying here and the flies like to land on me and eat my skin. And I think that's a gesture of not hurting a fly and allowing them to feed on that which is dead on my material body, which is allowing them to fulfill their function. They eat dead stuff, which is necessary. And I was noticing too that when they crawl on me, it kind of tickles. And in a way, it choicelessly brings awareness to the surface of the body, the skin of the body. It's like helping to resensitize the body to nature as nature is crawling upon the body, and also allowing nature to fulfill its function. The fly's eating my DNA, which might do something to its DNA. I actually feel that in the future we'll see that flies are really important for human longevity, because if we allow them to eat some of the dead stuff on us instead of just swatting them and killing them, and then saying they're dirty because we burst them open, and they carry diseases. Well, they do if you smash them. And of course there's some that carry diseases, but those are important for genetic changes as well. But anyways, the resensitization of them, tickling the skin and appreciating that, and appreciating what human constructs have deemed one of the lowliest creatures on the planet, and how we abhor insects in general, when they're one of the most important things. Everything's important, but they're so important. So the gesture of allowing something to fulfill its function in conjunction with the human body, as opposed to not allowing them to touch us or crawl on us. They joyfully dance around, eating dead bits of us. By allowing them to do that, I feel that we become, in a way, subconsciously okay with death, and allowing that which is part of transforming death into life to do its thing. And in that way, it's a gesture of longevity. We could wash our skin with chemicals, or we could allow the flies to eat little bits of our skin. I don't know why I started talking about that. Oh yeah, when I said I wouldn't hurt a fly. And you know, there's something profound about that statement, in that in altered states, oftentimes one gets in touch with past holograms of past lives and past lives of others, and some of those patterns are violent, and they can take one over and one can reenact them, and hence some of these really violent things that are happening. And I have experienced some of those violent patterns trying to take over this biophysiology, to enact that in order to carry on the imprints of past suffering and pain. And every time I surrender, and I in terms of fight, flight, or freeze, I freeze. I don't allow it to do anything to anyone. And by freezing, I often get transported into a mental institution, and where they do something to me. And for the most part, I allow that to happen too. But that is something that happens by virtue of not carrying on those patterns of violence. Sometimes people do get tricked into it, of course, in varying degrees, and I have too. But I've never physically hurt someone, and I have had a couple of those violent patterns in the beginning, and then later on it's only usually directed toward myself, in terms of I might violently end my own physical existence in what's called suicide. So that's the only thing that could possibly happen in terms of violence, unless there was some kind of self-defense thing really happening. But I've never been tricked into perpetuating that. So the ones who don't perpetuate that, when a big pattern comes on and they freeze or they flee and act all weird because there's these past patterns coming in, they get psychiatrized for being really afraid of thought and seeing the fear of thought. But anyway, my point is that part of that is the universe testing to see if we would hurt a fly. And I made that statement. I said I wouldn't hurt a fly, and that was the last day that I was in a space of beauty. And then there was a month of terror and scariness. And I didn't enact any of that. And then some of that came upon me again at later dates, for sure. But each time I refuse. And that tells the universe that it's safe to entrust this consciousness with more energy. It is kind of a test. It's not really a test, because sometimes people feel like they're being tested, and it is kind of a test in a way. So if a violent pattern took me over and I acted it out, I could end up locked away for life, right? So didn't pass the test. And I haven't passed tests in the past, for sure. I've done a lot. But anyway, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but the whole point is kinship with life and nature, and not harming nature. When we harm nature, we harm ourselves, and that's one of the reasons why so many people are experiencing self-harm, is because the whole self of the whole Gaia-sphere of the whole of life is being harmed by the I, the self, the feeling of separateness, which is an untruth. So as a gesture of reparation, I lay here connected to the grass, which is a gesture and a behavior saying, I can't go around telling every human I meet, we're one consciousness, we're one, we're not separate. It's just words. They won't feel it. So instead I allow the earth to feel my body as a gesture of that knowing, that truth. Maybe that's part of the function, is just lay on the earth. It's not much we can do right now. People won't listen, but connecting to the earth allows the universe to listen to our being and our energy more easily through the electric field of connection and magnetic field as well, and chemical, because our physical structure is connected to the physical earth. So it's a communication beyond words. And the thing is that this love, this oneness, this eternity is something way beyond words. So this again is a gesture of eternity, of communicating beyond words. I don't have to tell the earth anything, or the universe. I listen to the birds so that others might be able to hear them too. The brain state changes from I as a center to the epiphenomenon of beauty as the completely sensitive human organism integrates all sensory information to listen to the symphony of Gaia, and the inner richness diversifies into an infinite beauty that is always new. And in that way, the inner disappears. There is no inner, but the outer beauty being sensed by the outer human senses. It's all outer. And then arises the epiphenomenon of the unfoldment of beauty, as opposed to the arising of the illusory I. And the beauty that is the birds as sensed by a human organism necessitates the human. The birds don't necessarily hear themselves as the human ears hear their songs. So it requires the human ears. And the human ears hearing that beauty is one with that, and thus would not destroy that beauty, as that beauty is oneself. The oneself, which is a triangulating phenomena, in that one has heard that to see a rainbow requires the raindrops in the sky, the sun, the light of the sun, and the human eyes. But it's all one life. The I is suffering. It's not that one needs to relieve the suffering of the I. The I is suffering. When there's no I that blocks the vision of the eyes, the three eyes, then one can see that life is beauty. I was just watching a video on something called the McGurk effect. And I got the link from the video via Ron Unger's mailing list because he emailed about a video game that's out. I don't know how new it is, but it's called Hellblade. And apparently they made the game in collaboration with people who hear voices. And people who hear voices who played the game or watched the game, or I don't know how it happened, but they're saying that it's really an illustration of what it's like to hear voices. And I don't hear voices, but I'm interested in the whole spectrum of what happens in phenomena that generally get labeled as mental illness. And so they're saying the video game is quite accurate, and then people who hear voices are saying things like, people can understand me now, or it says here, I have to confess, just watching this video brought up a lot of emotion for me. It reminded me of the vast gulf of misunderstanding that usually exists between people with, quote, psychotic experiences and others, and what it means to finally overcome that gulf. To make sense of someone, to know that one can be made sense of, is an incredible gift. And that is surely true. But what I was thinking was that, well, I was thinking about how I've been talking to myself for almost 2 years in order to make sense of myself. Because if I want someone else to be able to make sense of me, the people who can make sense of me the most are psychiatrists. And they make sense of me in terms of their education, which isn't necessarily how I would make sense of myself. How I would make sense of myself is talking to myself on video for 2 years, and I still don't have a clue. So for psychiatrists to come in and say they know everything there is to know about me in 2 minutes, just based on a few symptoms of what they call symptoms, is silly. So it's wonderful for others to be able to make sense of me. But even if they did start to be able to make sense of me, I've probably only scratched the surface of making sense of myself, so how could I expect anyone to be able to make sense of me? And I don't know if I really want anyone to try. I would rather bring the energy back to myself and make sense of myself for myself, which is making meaning for myself. And I make tons of meaning. That's kind of what I do. And the opposite would be to hope that someone else would make meaning out of me, or I would mean something to them, meaning they understand me or make sense of me in some way. And in the process of making sense of myself, I've realized in some dimensions that I do have a function that I can't even make sense of. It's beyond logical sense making. So if I can't make sense of it, how can I expect someone else to make sense of it? It can intimate itself in some ways by certain clues and signs, but even that isn't it. So for example, there could be a little synchronicity that happens. And that is sort of a sign or a symptom of that energy at work, but it's not the energy at work. The energy at work is so much more vast than that little tidbit that was made made something that I can be aware of, something that can be made sense of. So even if I can make sense of some semblance of what is happening, it's still not what is happening. It's only that little tiny bit that was momentarily flashed into human awareness. But again, it is by no means a resemblance of the immensity of what is happening. The immensity of life is so mind-boggling and mind-blowing, and we love to think that we can make sense of it and pick it apart into its constituent pieces, which we can't. And this has nothing to do with the game or people feeling like it's nice that there's some medium out there that accurately somewhat presents the experience of hearing voices, because I haven't played the game. I only watched a small feedback video on the game, and so what I'm saying is only related to how I feel that it's important for us to go into making meaning for ourselves. So even if I've made meaning for 2 years with myself, that doesn't help someone else. It might only help in that it shows that making meaning is meaningful. And I could think it's this meaningless mental illness with a certain label, or I could make a lot of meaning, which is part of the capacity of that energy, and the traits that come out is the ability to make meaning for oneself, as opposed to being directly connected to old conditioning. And that's mixed in there too, of course, but one can be run by the conditioning. So my brain might be able to make meaning, but if I see the only meaning as a meaningless mental illness, now I've adopted all the conditioned memes of that, and I run according to that. I move according to that. And if I make meaning, then I see meaning everywhere, and life feels meaningful, and that's also a very good protection against feeling like life is meaningless and what that can lead to. And feeling like life makes no sense. Life no longer makes any sense. The meaning making sense, the sense of being able to make meaning. Feeling like one needs to be made sense of by another. That other has probably not even made sense of themselves, so why would we even want that per se? The sense of being able to see meaning and make it is important. And again, this isn't related to hearing voices or anything. It just sort of made me consider this whole process of making meaning. And even hearing people share their stories a week or so ago. They're saying, I just can't help but feel like there's some kind of meaning. Well, we have to make the meaning. If we don't make the meaning and wonder about it, we rely on the meanings made by other people. And that is second-hand information. We need to make first-hand meaning of our own sense. The trouble is when that first opens up, it's so intense, it's impossible to make meaning out of all of it. But slowly we can learn to make meaning. Making meaning is part of learning. Otherwise, we're only memorizing meanings and formulas that we've been told. And being told something is somebody's telling us through sound. So someone says something and I hear the words and I remember them or something. But there's something else that happens when we see something directly for ourselves. And back to that video on the McGurk effect. It's talking about how the same sound is being played, but the video shows the guys either making a ba or a fa mouth movement. It's the same sound, but depending on how his mouth moves, that's how we hear. And they're talking about it like it's some big mystery. But basically what they're saying is sight overrides sound. So seeing ba or fa overrides and tricks the brain into thinking that they're saying fa because vision overrides the sound, so it changes in our brain. But the thing is that hearing isn't only auditory. We hear partly by seeing. It's synesthetic, it's synesthesia, the senses mixing. To think that the senses are separate is silly. So, but then again, hearing, even in hearing, seeing is more important. So if I see one thing and somebody's telling me another, if I've directly seen it for myself, no matter what they tell me, my brain's always going to have some kind of doubt about what I heard, and what I see with my own eyes is going to be stronger. And this could actually be part of the mechanism of why hallucinations arise. Not why, but a correlation in that we're trying to realize that what we see with our own eyes is more important than what we hear from outside sources or people telling us. And so we start seeing things to see it within our own eyes, to start to see the importance of seeing things with our own eyes. But the brain distorts that process and projects things outwards that aren't really there, apparently. But part of it is to directly perceive with our own eyes. And since we haven't been doing that for so long, it gets distorted and we start seeing things with our own eyes that others can't see. But then when we go into the field of perceiving meaning, we are seeing with our own eyes what others can't see, because we're seeing new meaning that never was seen before by our brains. Whereas if we're operating based on conditioning, which is repetition, we're only seeing within that limited field. And the trouble with that is the conditioning is a lot of sound and image inside, but our own eyes are realizing in a way that it is seeing something different. It's seeing something contradictory to what this voice is telling us inside, like the inner chatter. And we trust vision more, so that increases the conflict with what we've been told to do. There's a lot of things going on there, and I don't know really what I'm talking about, but the McGurk effect video also said that when there's conflicting information, the senses have to try to make sense of it. So what happens when a person sees all this meaning, sees all this new meaning, and is seeing for oneself there are other meanings than the ones we've been programmed to believe are the only meanings of life? There's conflicting information, and then that can cause conflicting things happening in reality. Like, we could start projecting outward the things that are going on inward, because we're starting to see meaning. So then that's conflicting information. It starts messing with our senses and how we do sense reality. And then that makes us question reality even more. So, or question our conditioned reality. So hopefully one day we'll get to the point where we don't need to start hallucinating and questioning reality to look from a place of not knowing, to look from a place of questioning. Because when we eventually get to a place where we're hallucinating and reality's doing all these weird things and conflicting things are happening and our brain can't make sense of anything, we start questioning reality. But I feel that we can be raised to look at reality with a question mark in our eyes, not full of all this information that is image and sound in our mind that's conflicting with actuality that we can see with our own eyes, but we can't really see with our own eyes because our eyes are distorted by the sounds inside. We have conflict inside, and if we have this conflict going on inside, our senses are going to be conflicted because we're full of conflict. Whereas if we weren't full of conflict, our senses would be holistically processing everything, and we'd be able to move according to that without distortion. I don't know if that makes any sense, and that doesn't matter. What matters is being able to see something new for oneself, make things up, synthesize information for oneself. To make things up is to question. It's creative. It's new. Otherwise, we're regurgitating. And the brain is just so bored of that. No wonder it goes off into all this funny hallucination stuff. It's just bored. And I feel that part of the conflict when one goes into that state of making meaning is that the conditioning is always nipping at one's heels. So there's a conflict in the senses, and one wants to sense meaning, but then one also has a sense of the conditioning and the programming that pervades all of society. And how does one operate in that field of society, but also remain in the field of seeing meaning, seeing that there's no meaning in the field of conditioning. And when one sees that, one goes into the field of meaning. And one must be able to learn all the time, because otherwise one is in the gravity of the pull of the conditioning that is knowledge, that is not learning. Blah, 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 blah.